Good morning. This is Jim Ellsbury, Associate Pastor at Beacon of Hope Ministries in Clearwater, Florida. Today I'm bringing you the 14th installment of my End Time Prophecy series based on the book of Revelation. Today we're going to be talking about the end of Mystery Babylon and what all that means. First of all, I would like to remind you that all of these teachings, plus our Sunday morning services at Beacon of Hope starting way back in January 2001, and our Wednesday night Bible studies can all be found on our YouTube channel. You just go to YouTube, type in capital BOHM, all caps, space, global, and you can see any of these that I've been doing, any of the sermons, any of the Wednesday night Bible studies. So I encourage you to go there and look around. There's some really interesting stuff in there. Also, please subscribe. When you do go there, please subscribe. There's no obligation. It's just you would get notified when there's a new video being posted. So I highly encourage you to do that. So like I said, I want to talk about Mystery Babylon. And I'll be going over Revelation chapters 17 and 18 today. And there's a lot of stuff in there. So let's get started. I want to read first about the first some odd verses of Revelation 17. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls, remember we talked about those a couple of weeks ago, the bowls of wrath, came and spoke to me, saying, "Come here, and I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of sexual immorality, and those who live on the earth became drunk with the wine of her sexual immorality. And he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, holding in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and of the unclean things of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered greatly, and the angel said to me, 'Why do you wonder? I'll tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns.'" So, John has seen a vision of this woman on a scarlet beast. Now, the beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. Does that sound familiar? Of course it does. She's sitting on the beast of Revelation 13, who also has 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman herself is Mystery Babylon. Okay? And Babylon in the scriptures, especially if you read through Isaiah, Babylon was the ultimate in evil. Okay? In Isaiah's time, Isaiah foresaw what Babylon would do to the kingdom of Judah. He also foresaw the city of Babylon's downfall. Here, John is speaking of spiritual Babylon. And some people just think that's religion, like a false religion. As I was reading this, I discovered it's so much more than that. Babylon encompasses the political realm, okay, the Antichrist, who obviously will conquer most of the known world. It also is religion, of course, and I'm going to talk about that here in a moment. And it's also the economy. Babylon encompasses all of those things. And Revelation 17 and 18 talk about the fall of religious Babylon and the fall of economic Babylon. So, we see here that she's sitting on the beast, and she's well adorned, and she holds in her hand a gold cup full of the abominations and sexual immoralities. Now, in Scripture, a lot of times, sexual immorality, prostitution, is symbolic of turning away from God, turning away from the one true God. In the book of Hosea, God plays this out between Hosea and his wife, and talks about how Israel has prostituted herself with the nations by becoming idolatrous. So here we see this happening again. Any religious system that sets itself up against the one true God, as revealed in Scripture, is part of the Babylonian system. Many have tried to link this with the Roman Catholic Church. And while there might be aspects of that would be true, it's not just that. It is any false religion, any New Age religion, anything that sets itself up against the truth of the one true God. And notice the woman is sitting on the beast. The beast is subjected to the woman. The beast has to rely on the woman to gain his power. Remember, we talked in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, or 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse about the beast sitting in the temple of God, proclaiming himself, the Antichrist, proclaiming himself to be God. Now, whether that is a rebuilt Jewish temple, the third temple, or who knows, could be St. Peter's. It could be just symbolic of saying that he is Lord and God over the church. But for now, the beast is is in subjection to this prostitute woman, to Mystery Babylon, in order to gain his power. So, going on here, in verse 8, a little bit more about the beast. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction, and those who live on the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will wonder when they see the beast that he was and is not and will come. A lot of early Christians believed this beast to be the Emperor Nero, who died. They expected some sort of resurrected Nero, because we know what Nero did to the Christians in the city of Rome after the Great Fire in 64 AD. Nero, in order to take the blame away from himself, and I'm not saying Nero was responsible, but there is possible indication that he did burn Rome in order to rebuild it. But he blamed the Christians and persecuted them in the most heinous ways. So, many early Christians believed that the Antichrist would be a kind of a reincarnate Nero. And that's, I don't know. All I know is that the spirit of the Antichrist lives now. We know that from what John wrote in 1 John. The spirit of lawlessness, Paul says, is already at work in the world. So, here we have the beast who was and is not and is to come. I believe that's symbolic of all the evil emperors, all the evil rulers. Because he's going to come just like Nero, just like Antiochus Epiphanes, just like Herod the Great, and just like Hitler. People will wonder at this amazing ruler. Remember what it says in Revelation 13 after the beast dies and comes back, supposedly dies and comes back to life. Who is like the beast and who can make war with him? Well, going on in verse 9, here is the mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads of the beast are 7 mountains upon which the woman sits. And they are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is yet to come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. The beast which was and is not is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings, which have not yet received a kingdom, but they will receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour, for a very short time. These have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. So, there's a lot in here. 7 heads represent 7 hills, or 7 mountains. Duh. That's pretty easy. That's Rome. Rome is known as the city of the 7 hills. So John was looking at this, and it was revealed to him that, yes, the city of Babylon, which was destroyed by Cyrus in 539 BC, has now transferred all of its political and religious and economic power to Rome. Rome was, in a sense, the new Babylon. But there are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is yet to come. Some people say these are Roman emperors. However, that would be impossible if John wrote this during the reign of Domitian. If you count, even if we ignore Julius Caesar for the moment as the first emperor, which he was never crowned emperor. The first emperor was Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. 1 is, well, that would have to be the Emperor Galba, who reigned for a very short time in AD 69, known as the Year of the 4 Emperors. Galba, Otho, and Vitellius all reigned. And then Vespasian was called back from the war in Israel to become emperor. So 1 is, if that's Galba, then Otho would be the one yet to come. Well, if we ignore those minor emperors, then Vespasian would be the one who is, and his son Titus would be the one who is to come. None of that fits, really. It's better to look at those kings as kingdoms who have historically been hostile to God's people. First, Egypt. We just had Passover a little while back. Actually, this is the 8th day of Passover. And we know that the Egyptians, especially the Pharaoh, was very hostile to God's people. Second, Assyria. Assyria conquered the northern empire of Israel, took it into captivity. Third, Babylon. Babylon took the southern kingdom, conquered the southern kingdom, and took them into exile. Fourth, Persia. Now, Persia started out good under Cyrus the Great because he allowed the Jews to go back into the Promised Land and have, while they were still subject to Persia, they were able to rebuild the temple, rebuild the city of Jerusalem. However, later in that number of kings, we had Xerxes, who allowed Haman to almost obliterate every Jew in the Persian Empire. Okay? After Persia, the next great empire was Greece. Under Alexander the Great, he conquered everything from the eastern Mediterranean, from Greece eastward over to India. It was a huge empire. Once Alexander died, that empire split into 4 parts. One of the parts, the Seleucid Empire, had this back and forth going on with the Ptolemies in Egypt over who owned the Promised Land. But as we know, as I've talked about before, Antiochus Epiphanes wanted to destroy the Jews. So he almost did. Had it not been for the Maccabean revolt, he would have destroyed the Jews. So, the 5 that were Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and Greece. That's Rome. 1 is yet to come, and that will be some sort of end-time confederacy of nations. And it says those 10 kings will give their power to the beast. Those 10 kings will give their power over to the beast. Some sort of 10-nation confederacy. And I know everybody was, ooh, all crazy back when the common market first formed, because guess how many nations were in it? 10. So everybody thought it was the common market, was this end time political system. Well, we know that just didn't come about. Now, the number 10 could also be symbolic of man's government. So it's just symbolic of a number of kingdoms giving their power over to the beast. That's entirely possible. But look at the next verse. I love verse 14 of Revelation 17. These, the beast and the kings, will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called and chosen and faithful. Wow. That's a reference to the Battle of Armageddon, which we talked about 2 weeks ago. They're going to think they can kill Jesus, destroy Jesus and all the saints when he comes back. No, not going to happen. Jesus will overcome them. And we'll find out exactly what happens next week and when we go over chapter 19. And the angel said to me, the waters, this is verse 15 of Revelation 17, the waters which you saw where the prostitute sits, and the peoples are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. Remember, the waters, the sea, is always prophetically indicative of people, nations. And the 10 horns which you saw and the beast, these will hate the prostitute and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh and burn her with fire, for God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose and by giving their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God will be fulfilled. The woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of earth. Another reference to Rome, which at that time was the ruling nation. Now, I don't know if it's going to mean Rome at the end times, but there will, whatever city the Antichrist chooses as his own, that's what it's going to be talking about. But notice here, the 10 kings and the beast are going to hate the woman. They're going to destroy her. They're going to destroy the very thing that put them into power. Remember, I talked about it being a false religion. Well, remember what John said in 1 John chapter 2, verse 19, that talking about the antichrists, and there have been many, they will be summed up in, of course, in the final beast. But he said, they pretended to be part of us. This is 1 John chapter 2, verse 19. But they weren't really of us, because if they were, they would have stayed. So the Antichrist and the kings first betray the church. Okay? They betray the church. Then they betray Mystery Babylon. Then they betray the religion that set them into power. The beast is going to look like he's a Christian. Oh, he's so Christian. But all of a sudden, people are going to begin to see his works, and they're going to read between the lines that this man is no Christian. He's no believer. So he'll leave. I mean, he will abandon the church. And of course, we know he will persecute the church. And this false religion will persecute the church. But what happens is, again, the Lamb will overcome them. But let's just go back, because I think it's important. I talked about this when I talked about the Antichrist. And I want to share it again, that in Genesis chapter 3, the devil promised Eve a lot. First, he knocked her off balance by saying, did God really say you couldn't eat of any of the trees? Which, of course, was a lie. You know, he's a liar. Satan is a liar. But Eve said, oh, no, just that tree in the center, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We can't eat it or touch it. God never said they couldn't touch it. Eve added that part. He said, or we'll die. God said you eat, you disobey, you die. And Satan said in Genesis 3, you shall surely not die, for God knows. Once you eat of it, your eyes will be opened. You'll know good and evil. You will be like God, knowing good and evil. That's the lie. That's what all false religion is based on. We will try and know good and evil from within us instead of using the Bible, God's Word, as the objective standard. Over in Romans chapter 1, Paul writes about how their foolish minds became darkened. In verses 24 and 25 of Romans chapter 1. Professing to be wise, they became fools. They worshiped the creatures and not the Creator. Okay? They worship. In fact, I'm going to go over there. I want to read this because this is so important. Romans chapter 1. Therefore, God gave them up to vile impurity and the lust of their hearts so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. Okay, in verse 22, claiming to be wise, they became fools. They exchanged, in verse 23, the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible mankind, of birds, four-footed animals, and crawling creatures. Therefore, God gave them up to vile impurity in the lust of their hearts so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. Verse 25, for they exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who was blessed forever. In 2 Thessalonians, Paul writes that because they loved the lies, they loved the falsehoods, he'll send among them a strong delusion that they should believe the lie. That's what sets it up for the beast to rule. This whole notion that truth is relative, that there is no real God, or we make God in our image. Okay? You're just setting yourself up for deception if you believe that. So what's going to happen is the beast and the 10 kings are going to destroy the false religion, because where will all worship be centered by that time? It'll be centered on the beast, and he will share that glory with no one else. That is going to lead to his downfall, as we'll see next week in chapter 19. Now, Revelation chapter 18 goes through the destruction of economic Babylon. And there's some really interesting things here. I won't read the entire chapter because it's pretty long. But in chapter 18, verse 1, after these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated from his glory. And he cried out with a mighty voice, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit, and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations have fallen because of the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of earth have committed acts of sexual immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich from the excessive wealth of her luxury. Economic Babylon is tied in with religious Babylon. Okay? People committed economic prostitution, as it were, to become rich, to become wealthy. They committed this kind of economic prostitution with economic Babylon. The angel gives a warning in verse 4, and I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive any of her plagues. For her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her offenses. And what happens is we find out in chapter 18 In one day, that entire economic system falls. In one day. It says the merchants and the people in their ships look upon the burning city and they cry, "Woe, woe is Babylon," because all their wealth is gone in an instant. All of it. God judges that economic system and destroys it. And there's one thing about it. I want to talk about the merchants. Over in verse 11, "And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her," Revelation 18:11, "because no one buys their cargo anymore, cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones, and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet, and every kind of citron wood, every article of ivory, and every article made from very valuable wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, perfume, frankincense, wine, olive oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, sheep, and cargo of horses, carriages, slaves, and human lives." If you ever needed an argument against slavery, there it is. Slavery in all of its forms is part of that Babylonian economic system. Whether it's selling people into sexual slavery, whether it's just slavery as we commonly know of it, it's part of that Babylonian system. And notice too, these are normally not cheap things. I mean, wheat could be cheap and corn and whatever. But ivory, precious jewels, wine, olive oil, those were not cheap things. Those were expensive. Gold. So just think, we've seen even in recent weeks with the war in Ukraine, how the stock market has just fluctuated. If we're so dependent on that. Netflix, okay, they lost, I don't know how many subscribers, and their stocks bottomed out. They lost billions because of that. So just imagine if the entire economic system failed. Who knows? Remember, by this time, people will have to have taken the mark in order to buy or sell. Let's say something happens to that computer system. Immediate crash. Nobody can buy or sell. That would be total chaos. But that's what's going to happen. Economic Babylon will fall. And I just want to finish up with verse 19, going on a little bit from there of chapter 8, Revelation 18. "And they threw dust on their heads." Can you imagine? It'd be like what? The Great Depression again, when the stock market crashed. They threw dust on their heads, were crying out, weeping and mourning, saying, "Woe, woe! The great city in which all the ships at sea became rich from her prosperity. For in 1 hour she has been laid waste." This will be something immediate and striking. I mean, it's just going to be like an instant destruction. But verse 20, "Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, because God has pronounced judgment for you against her." Verse 21, "Then a strong angel picked up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, So will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence, and will never be found again." Finally, what Isaiah foretold in Isaiah 47, in Isaiah chapter 47 about the fall of Babylon, will be fulfilled in its finality here. Yes, Babylon, the city, fell to Cyrus in 539, but that Babylonian spirit lived on. But finally, the great city, that economic system, will fall. That economic system that was aligned with the religious system and persecuted the saints. You remember a good example of that kind of allegiance comes from Acts chapter 19, where Paul was in Ephesus, and so many people got saved they stopped worshiping the goddess Artemis. Okay, and Ephesus depended on, part of their economy was making these little tiny silver statuettes, if you will, of the goddess Artemis, the many-breasted one. Basically, it was a woman covered with breasts from chest to waist. But that's where they got their money. And Paul challenged that. So they hauled him before the courts, had him kicked out of Ephesus. Because that economic system is in line with the political system and the religious system, all of which is set against the true believers. But remember, I always put in the hashtag, fear not, or do not fear, because next week we're going to find out what happens, because next week Jesus comes back. And we'll see the end of the Antichrist and the false prophet, the end of all the armies ranged against him. And I'm going to talk about the millennium next week and how it's going to be under the millennium. So I'm really excited about that. I can't wait. So again, this has been Jim Ellsbury, Associate Pastor at Beacon of Hope Ministries in Clearwater, Florida. Thank you all for watching. Remember, you can see this video not only on my page if you're one of my friends, and I usually have one or two at least watching live, and I appreciate that. But also you can go to Beacon of Hope's YouTube page, because this video with all the teachings I've done, this one will be uploaded along with all the other teachings I've done with all of Beacon's Sunday sermons since the beginning of January of 2021, our Wednesday night Bible studies. It's just a great treasury of teaching. So I would encourage you to go there and subscribe. Just go to YouTube, do a search for capital B, capital O, capital H, capital M, BOHM, that stands for Beacon of Hope Ministries, space global. So BOHM global. And just subscribe if you'd like, because that way you get notified when there's a new video posted. I just encourage y'all to do that. I also just encourage you not to lose heart. In this day and age, it's easy to do that. We see it's easy to be depressed. It's easy to forget who's in control. But remember, God is in control, no matter what things look like. Our Lord is in control. He is, as we read today, Lord of Lords and King of Kings. And he reigns supreme over all. Again, thank you, and God bless. Have a wonderful day.